Hello, and welcome to my individual project for managing the assessment feedback process, MAF, within which I will be exploring the art of creative risk, cultivating creativity and risk-taking resilience within the creative arts in higher education. This is a development from my group project, which was entitled How to Encourage Risk Through Assessment and Feedback. A quote that perhaps encapsulates both my individual project and group presentation and is a bridge between them is that from Caroline Bailey. Avoiding risk-taking is one of the biggest barriers to creative thinking. Starting from where my group left off, I will firstly be exploring creativity, how to encourage it, how to create an environment through which it can thrive, and most of all, and most importantly, the way in which assessment and feedback can play a crucial role in it. By exploring this notion, it will perhaps shed light on my next point, and that is risk-taking, or rather the lack of it. This is a barrier that I have come up against time and again with my students. How should I encourage risk-taking? What do I as a teacher need to understand before I can develop it? How can I use assessment and feedback to support this? At the centre of this project and these two landmarks, we find my students. To give some context and to understand where the inspiration for both our group presentation and my individual project has come from, let us look at the notion of tick boxing and the ever more increasing need for students to tick box their way through assessment and sometimes their own deep learning. I have noticed that for some there is a focus on what is needed to pass. As Ramsden states, they are purely and simply aimed at passing the exams without bothering too much about understanding the subject. This is a barrier which I have come up against many times, and I do wonder if it is increasing with each new cohort. There seems to be a need to know exactly how to get the top grades, but this need is not always balanced with the want to learn deeply about the subject. I would like to help my students to become aware that educationally valid assessment is an opportunity to learn and to reveal the depth of one's knowledge. Now that I have given the context for the project, and like my students, let's take a look at the learning outcomes I will be exploring. These will act as parameters and aid the framing of this project. In order to understand how to support my students in the art of creative risk, I will first look at the role that assessment plays in their learning. Perhaps with a greater understanding of the purpose of assessment, creativity and risk-taking might appear. So let's take a moment to explore assessment and feedback, pull out its purposes and discover ways in which appropriate methods of assessment and feedback can help support creativity. Traditional assessment, or simple models of assessment, keeps the authority in the assessment and with the teacher. This is where the method is summative, exams, papers and performances towards the latter part of the year, a summation of students' work, which tends to reveal only whether the student can recognise, recall or plug in, where they will be measured in terms of reproducing facts or implementing memorised procedures and formula, where they are more likely to have surface approach to learning, and students may successfully complete their course while never gaining an understanding of fundamental ideas. So, how can we construct assessment and feedback to move from teaching as transmission that has little space to accommodate the idea that different methods of assessment may be appropriate, to creating an environment where the assessment of students is above all about understanding the process and outcomes of student learning? It is almost impossible to define creativity, but perhaps the term that I think gets closest to it is creative problem solving, CPS, which has been explored deeply by the Creative Education Foundation. This toolkit approach advocates a range of methods to help students to think outside the box. Please refer to my commentary for further detailing or specific examples of this toolkit in my own practice. For me, this is a crucial piece of learning. It is not enough for me to merely retort to my students to be creative. I must create an environment and an assessment process through which they know they can be creative and take creative risks. Within our institution's assessment framework document, we can find a number of possible reasons how students can view the assessment process. For me, it is the words of Brown that best link to my exploration. If the right environment for creative risk is created and the students are partaking in this journey, how do I then assess them if it is unpredictable and difficult to capture? The structure that I would be adhering to during this is that of constructive alignment, put forward by Biggs and used by London Metropolitan University. Biggs states that as a teacher, I need to create a learning environment that supports the learning activities appropriate to achieving the desired learning outcomes. In order to explore this, I will be using the Level 4 module called Devising. Here are our learning outcomes and assessment criteria. Please pause the video if you need to read for a moment longer. Creativity must have taken place between these two, but what specific learning activities have taken place? Please see my accompanying document for further examples. The first point of assessment is Process 1. Continuous assessment is key to the work generation. Creativity is not just something that happens in a light bulb moment. I would like to put forward the suggestion of the addition of creative journals. This will enable the students to have a greater awareness of their creative journey. Recently, students have felt that they have only had feedback at formal assessment points. With the addition of a creative journal, students will be able to note down their continuous feedback, thus being able to understand a more complete creative journey. Now we have our second point of assessment, our essay. I would like to take the mystery away from this writing process and start this process within a group environment where they would generate ideas, purge them and incubate them. This would lead to a sense of shared ownership and shared risk when approaching their individual essays. We are in the home straight now with our third process, our final assessment point, a practical performance. Something which I believe would be an enhancement to this particular assessment point would be the addition of consensual assessment. The idea that a product or response is created to the extent that appropriate observers consensually agree it is creative. And also the element of self-assessment, for the person nearest to the creativity is the creator. I would like to put forward a form that the students will need to complete as part of this final assessment, with different categories to help guide this process. For it to make sense to move the assessing activity and responsibility as near as possible to the person who is best informed. Before we finish, let us pop to feedback. I propose that in order to receive their final grades, students must respond to their written feedback. It would make it formative so that the learner understands that it is a way of developing their self-awareness of their own creativity. We can see that all three of these assessment points and the feedback processes are linked to the stated learning outcomes. Although they can be enhanced with additional methods to enable the students to feel secure and able to be proactive within their own creative risk journey. We also know that there needs to be a range of assessment and feedback methods to be open enough for creativity and risk-taking to flourish, for it is complex and multidimensional. It cannot be captured effectively and comprehensively by any single instrument. Ultimately, I'm looking to empower the teacher, empower the environment, and empower the learner. For if the learner is clear about their intended goal, they will purposely direct and manage their learning and their own development. If we have all of these elements working together, then creativity and risk-taking can ultimately flourish within the classroom environment. Thank you so much for watching this, and I hope you have enjoyed it.